First to the United States, where one of the main issues ahead of November's election, which has been raised by both parties, is the future of American democracy. Well, President Joe Biden has said he is not confident there'll be a peaceful transfer of power if Donald Trump loses the presidential election. President Biden, who is not running for a second term, made the comments in an interview with CBS News, his first interview since quitting the race himself.
Are you confident that there will be a peaceful transfer of power in January 2025?
If Trump wins, no, I'm not confident at all. I mean, if Trump loses, I'm not confident at all. He means what he says. We don't take him seriously. He means it. All the stuff about if we lose, there'll be a bloodbath. It's have to be a stolen election. Look what they're trying to do now in the local election districts where people count the votes. They're elected, they're putting people in place in states that they're going to count the votes, right?
President Biden there. Well, Mr. Trump is due to hold a news conference within the next hour. In other news, 2.5 years since Russia began its full-scale invasion of neighboring Ukraine, Ukrainian forces have launched an incursion into Russia. According to Moscow, up to 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers, as well as tanks and armored vehicles, crossed the border into the Kursk region in an operation which began on Tuesday. Well, the region has declared a state of emergency and has warned residents of further missile and drone attacks by Ukraine. Russia says operations are continuing to drive out Ukrainian forces involved in the incursion, and a number of people have been killed. There's been no official comment from Kyiv. Well, for more on this, let's cross live to London and speak with Arise European Affairs analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. What is your sense of what Ukrainian forces are doing on the other side of the border?
Well, there are three aspects to this. The first one is that this is an incursion designed to disrupt Russian invasion attack, which was presumably going to happen in the near future. Two, it seems to be made up of very experienced soldiers, and so therefore that's why they have had some success to date. But three, it's kind of hard to see where the advantage lies for them to do this. Crossing the war into Russia risks that the Russians themselves, who are not, as far as one can tell, entirely convinced that this war is a good idea, it would mean rousing the Russians to be more, I can put it, patriotic, more supportive of the Russian war effort. Number two, it's unclear what disruption they've occurred in the Russian plans. And three, if it fails, as it probably will, because it's not in great strength, that actually comes across as a Russian success. So whilst I can see the Ukrainians have had a measure of success to date, I think myself it is not a wise move. And the other aspect is, if they lose soldiers here, and we know they're already overstretched and have problems with ammunition in other areas, it could be a mistake in the fact that it might, so to speak, weaken their overall strength. So personally, I'm unconvinced by this necessity or even the wisdom of such an attack.
Well, let's just be clear that there's been relative silence from Ukraine about this operation, and there's really been no smidge of confirmation from them so far. But from what I understand, this is a major attack, comparatively speaking, and I wonder whether you sense that something significant is happening, or is this just part of a psychological dimension designed to apply pressure on Russians living in those border settlements that you were talking about?
Well, I think there is some pressure on the border settlements. You're quite right on that point. But Russia is a very big country, and the fact that a handful of settlements have gone, or there's a state of emergency in one region, really is very small in comparison to the rest of the country. And as I repeat, I don't think it's all that going to be all that successful in the medium term, let alone the long term. There is another aspect to it. One has come across the comment that Russia, although it has now been invaded by this force, has not used the nuclear option or threatened it, which shows the nuclear option it's not going to be used. But according to my analysis, they never did plan to use the nuclear option against Ukraine, whom they regard as fellow Russians being misled by neo-Nazis. That was the official line for some time. Rather, the point here is, how long can this incursion survive for? And if it goes wrong, it will be a Russian success, and that's how Russian PR will treat it. I think that is the reason for the Ukrainian silence, that if they were to suddenly crow, look how much we've gained, and afterwards lose, it would heighten the eventual failure. That, I think, is why Ukraine is staying silent.
Well, I wonder if you might react to the latest lines that we're hearing coming out of that region, the Russians themselves admitting that Ukraine had advanced several kilometers into the Kursk region and 11 settlements have reportedly been taken. So looking at the scale of it, Dr. Laskiewicz, could it be that the Ukrainians I mean, I agree with you that they really is not a very big force. I'm not quite sure about the size of the damage they're able to inflict. But could it be that the Ukrainians are trying to draw the Russians fighting in Ukraine back to Russia and out of their country?
I don't think that is the case for a very simple reason. The Russians were massing troops there in order to invade Ukraine from that point, to open up another front. And therefore, this incursion was to disrupt some of these operations. But by that, same token, it means that Russia has enough forces there to deal with this incursion. The initial Ukrainian success is, of course, because the attack was unexpected, though in an age of satellites, it's hard to see exactly why it was all that unexpected. Rather, I would suspect that these initial successes, whilst they are something, will prove untenable. And that is the whole problem. Because if they do prove to be untenable, it will be seen as Ukrainian defeat.
So I guess the question is, after this punch by Ukraine, what happens next? Because President Putin has called it a major provocation.
Well, that is the problem. We come back to whether it's a wise move at all. Because if they attack Russian territory, as I pointed out, there's a patriotic aspect to the Russians which may suddenly become aroused. It also gives Putin an excuse to do something more. And as if to add to our problems, the EU has said the Ukraine is quite right to invade, thus adding even more, how can we put it, fuel to the fire. What will he do, though? I mean, this is the interesting question. He certainly is looking for a further excuse for him, but whether he will do something drastic, it remains to be seen. Because after all, his whole point was to conquer parts of the Ukraine, not to leave it a smoking ruin. So in that sense, I think that what this will do is simply give him cause for perhaps further bombing, further attacks. But I don't think it will mean a major escalation in terms of going non-conventional.
And very briefly, Dr. Laskiewicz, because I'm told we're out of time. I mean, at the moment, who's got the bigger punch in this war? Is it Russia, or are the scales starting to tip?
No, Russia still retains all the advantages of being a far greater nation. So in the long run, by sheer size, it can wind down and wear down the Ukrainians. However, the Ukrainians, if they acquire sufficient weapons from the West, will be able to stop the Russians for some time, as they are doing. But that in turn means the Russians may finally do something and turn on the West. This is the worry. This is the escalation point. We hope that the Russians will not take action in any way against the West itself as a result of the West arming the Ukrainians.
Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is Arise European Affairs Analyst.